Hi, my name's Tim, and I'm going to be talking to you about some books today. I've got the cup of tea here because this is going to be quite a personal topic that we're going to talk through. And these are the 12 books that have shaped my life, both personally and through reading and my view on the world and things like that. So, let's get started. So, the first book, is going to be a book of poetry that I got when I was a kid. It's called The New Kid on the Block, and it's by Jack Prelutsky. So I grew up in the Bahamas up until just before I turned 7, and this is a book of poetry that we brought back from the Bahamas. So I've had it since I would say 5 or 6. It is children's it's poetry for children. It's very funny. It's very silly. Everything rhymes, and I think some of those, one poem in particular, even so, it's been 30 years since I first got this book, and I can still know one of the poems off by heart. I haven't looked at it, so if I get it wrong, but it's called Homework, oh Homework, and it's Homework, oh Homework, I hate you, you stink. I wish I could wash you away in the sink. If only a bomb would explode you to bits. Homework, oh Homework, you're giving me fits. I'd rather take baths with a man-eating shark or wrestle a lion alone in the dark. Eat spinach and lettuce, pet 10 porcupines, than tackle the homework my teacher assigns. Homework, oh Homework, you're last on my list. I don't even know why you even exist. If you would leave now, it will tickle me pink. Homework, oh Homework, I hate you, you stink. Yeah, so that's 30 years in my brain. Um, yeah, and it's just, it highlights, if I look back at it, and it's humour, it's rhyming patterns. I do love patter songs in musicals. So I think that's a key part of it. Uh, yeah, so I think that's a key one for me. And that was one of, like, I have memories of reading that in the Bahamas, and I have memories of reading that at school in the UK. So the next series is another series of books I read as a kid, and they are the Red Wall books by Brian Jakes. I didn't know at the time when I read them how to pronounce his name, so I said Brian Jacques or Jacques because it's Jacques, like the French name, but it's Brian Jakes. This is a huge series. I think it's like 17 books or something. I read probably the first 13, 14 of them, and then the reason why I haven't finished them, and I probably never will, is I simply grew out of the series. And the only reason why they stopped making them is because the author unfortunately passed away. But these are series of anthropomorphic animals based around a Redwall Abbey. It's a series about that progresses through time, so like hundreds of years, basically hundreds of generations pass. It's the animals in the forest are mice, squirrels, badgers, hares, things like that. Each of the animals has their own particular personality. The hares are all incredibly foppish, and they say "what" after everything. Um, the mice are generally the main characters. Um, Badgers live for a very long time compared to mice. So the badgers, like you would see a great 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 grandson of a character, and it would still be the same badger because they can live a lot longer. And they taught me, right and wrong, good and bad. It does go into that, and doing what is right. And I just think the stories were great. They've kind of all washed over me, because it has been 25 years since I've read them, so it's been a while. But yeah, I would say that was the series I was reading, and I remember like no one else at school had even heard of them. Everyone else was just reading Roald Dahl, things like that. I didn't really read that much Roald Dahl as a kid because I was busy reading Redwall. And I had fun novelty poetry books from Jack Prelutsky, again, who no one had ever heard of. So, the third book series is one that isn't going to surprise anyone for a particular age group and under, and it's Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. So, for me, I was the generation where Harry Potter was coming out. So for me, the books aren't just, it's not just about the books, it's about the wait. and the build up to the next book and waiting to see what happened. And I remember the last 3 books, I want to say, me and my mum both bought separate copies so that we could read them at the same time. And I'd read them before she even started. And that happened all 3 times. And it was about devouring them as quickly as possible so that you would know what would happen. And then everyone was reading them. And we went to Universal with the kids in California this summer, and there is Harry Potter World there. And we took the kids, and the kids they've never read Harry Potter because they're 6 and 4, so they're too little. But they were like, "Oh, what's all this about?" And I just started telling them the story, basically from the first book, of like just things that happened. You know, Harry had to live in the cupboard under the stairs, and his cousin and his aunt and uncle were horrible to him, and then he found out he was really a wizard and had to go to a special wizard school, and they were just completely enraptured by it. And I forgot how much I enjoyed it because now it comes with all the other stuff, which is horrible, really, because it was a key part of my childhood into adolescence. And it does, I think, for the millennial generation, it is that kind of glue that keeps us all connected. And it's a shame that that's now being ruined by the shame it's being ruined, and it's a shame further that it's being ruined by the author. So that's a shame. But that's the 3rd book and series. For me, my favourite is probably Goblet of Fire. But I'll do another video on that probably. But also, one thing that is incredible is that it's a phenomenon. And she released 7 books in 10 years. So she was cranking them out. And the books got longer and longer and longer and more adult. So they grew up with the audience. And she nailed it. She nailed the ending. And we don't appreciate that enough, I don't think. If you look at other things, that other big fantasy series that are not finished, or big fantasy things that got turned into TV shows that were not finished and didn't nail the ending, I think we can't take that for granted that she did a very good job. Anyway, the next book is a book called The Traveller by someone called John Twelvehawks. So this is a thriller, I would say. I don't quite know how to describe it. It's about travellers are people who can transcend to another realm of consciousness. And historically they have been prophets and great leaders and things like that. And this is about these 2 brothers. And this secret organisation is out to get them and control them. I think the secret organisation is called the Tabula, I want to say. Again, I read this 2009, 10? I don't know. Maybe even earlier. So a long time ago. But I was a teenager going into an adult. And what this taught me, so there's this group out to get them. There's another group called the Harlequins, who are there to protect these travellers. And the Harlequins are incredibly paranoid people. They don't do any... they try to stay off CCTV. They behave in random fashions to avoid them being traceable. And also there's, I think the 2nd book is all gets into the free running community, just as free running was starting to happen, be like a philosophy. And what this taught me is this kind of taught me to stick it to the man and to question authority, and that organizations aren't doing things for the good of you, the consumer. They're doing things for the good of their bank balances and the shareholder stock prices. It taught me to question authority, which previously I'd never done. At school, I was very good. I was very well behaved. Or I think I was. And it just taught me that just don't take everything at face value. And I still think now, as we move more towards automation, AI, companies taking pictures of you without you knowing about it, companies monitoring you without you knowing about it, and I think it's becoming more and more prevalent. And that book and the trilogy called the Fourth Realm Trilogy is still in my mind whenever I think about this kind of stuff. So that's book number 4. Book number 5 is Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I remember when the films were coming out, and I was so into it. I read The Hobbit in year 6 at school, so I was 10, and loved it. I just loved it. And then I tried reading Lord of the Rings straight away afterwards, and I couldn't do it. I was 10 years old. I couldn't get into it. I got hardly anywhere. I hadn't left the Shire, not by any stretch. And then the films came out, and I still think the films are incredible. And I loved the first film, Fellowship of the Ring. I must have seen it so many times, and I had like a Warhammer board game of it, and I was just like so into it. And I tried reading it then when the films came out, which I can't remember when that was. I want to say 2001, but I don't know if that's right. Um, and I couldn't get into it. I found it too difficult. And then when I was a bit older, I think I was in uni, I would say, I would guess, I read them, and it just, people are like, oh man, it's just too old fashioned and all kind of stuff, and it is, but it's timeless. It's like a myth. It's like a myth that we just all know, and I think everyone, even if you don't like fantasy, should read it because it's just in our public consciousness in a way, a bit like Harry Potter is now, and it's just incredible, and it taught me that fantasy could be for grown-ups, but also not be too gritty, and just, I do think it's just a part of my personality in a way. It's my love for Lord of the Rings, and I have just read The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I haven't read the Silmarillion. I haven't read all of the other stuff that has come out from his Tolkien's notes and things like that. But I am looking forward to when my kids are older, I can read them, The Hobbit, and maybe read them Lord of the Rings. I'm looking forward to that. So, the sixth book or series is a book series called Payne and Jones series by someone called Chris Kuznetsky. This came out just after all of the Da Vinci Code stuff because it took the mick out of it. And honestly, for a long time, I didn't really read much, and those were basically the only books I read. So they're action adventure stories about going to somewhere around the world to find mythical items. The sword that stabbed Jesus, the throne of Alexander the Great, I think is one of them. I can't really remember. One of them is like Nostradamus's diary, things like that. And it's these two characters, and the banter between them is outstanding. The action's great, and I just really enjoyed how Chris Kuznetsky took something that was super popular, all of the Dan Brown copies, and it was a Dan Brown copy. That's why the first book got published, and completely took the mick out of them. I thought it was brilliant. So, and those were the only books I read for a long time because I got out of the habit of reading. And then in book 7 for me, in this list, in 2016, so 7 years ago, wow, a book came out called The Girl of Ink and Stars. Have I got it here? I can't find it right now. And it was by Kieran Millward Hargrave, who I knew. I met her when I was 16. She was 15, 14, something like that. Friend of a friend. And went to house parties and all kinds of stuff that you do when you're 16 to 18 and you can't go out and legally buy alcohol. And then a few years later, there was a book on a shelf in a bookshop with her name on it. And it was truly inspiring. And I have always wanted to tell stories. And I thought, I had a little notebook from when I was a kid of like story ideas, and I was like, oh, this is how I would do it if it was a TV show, an animated TV show, things like that. And then Kieran has a book on the shelf, and I was like, if she can write a book, someone I know has written a book. I never met an author or even knew of someone who knew an author. They're almost mystical people. They're just names on spines. They're not real people. And someone I knew had written a book. And I was like, wait, if they've written a book, maybe I can write a book. And from there started my journey to being an attempted author and being a writer and writing. And that journey, I've got another video on that coming up probably soon-ish, but been very up and down. But Kieran's just released her 10th book, In the Shadow of the Wolf Queen, and it's incredible. And she has developed so much as a writer. Yeah, and it's just really inspiring. And it inspired me to start my writing journey. So number 8 is The Maze Runner by James Dashner. And this I read this in 2016 as well, and this was when I was just starting to get into reading again. I just discovered Goodreads, and I was like, oh, and I really started reading again. Like, I read more in 2016 than I had done. I read like 30 books or something like that, and I'd read more than I had done for the past 5 years plus, and it showed that showed the YA young adult genre. It's not really a genre, but you know what I mean. Demographic to me, which I'd never read that. That genre didn't exist when I was a young adult. It was children's and then adults, and then there was this mythical thing in between that came out, and it showed me that you can write pacey, almost thriller writing, action. Like, I always say that James Dashner can write about making a jam sandwich, and it would be incredible to read because it would be so dramatic. It's almost like the editing in an what's his name, Edgar Wright film. That's what his writing's like, and I was like, that's what I want my writing to be like. That was a big inspiration for me for writing my first book. So, yeah, and the series isn't perfect, not by any stretch, but I still really like it. Then for book or series number 9, it's in 2017. I started reading A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin, and I started watching the TV show. I was a bit late to the TV show because I didn't have Sky Atlantic, HBO. I didn't have that, and so I think I started watching it around. I remember when the Red Wedding happened, and I wasn't watching it then. So I think I caught up. I managed to catch up, but I wasn't kind of on the bandwagon straight away. And I read this, and it was incredible. It was incredible to see. First of all, they were the biggest books I'd read. Like, one book is bigger than all of Lord of the Rings. They're huge books, and I never read such huge books. It kind of showed me I could do that. Showed me I love fantasy, epic in scale, very adult. So just incredible. And then book number 10 is The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. I read this in 2017, and that's when I discovered this genre of fiction that I really enjoy, which is science fiction before they knew the science. They called them science romances. So Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, that kind of turn of the century, maybe a bit later. So like Edwardian science literature. I really enjoyed that, and I thought The Island of Dr. Moreau is my favourite book by H.G. Wells. I really enjoyed that. And then in book 11 for me is The Mortal Engines by Philip Reeve. I read this in 2019, and it's an incredible series. It's 4 books, and I had to spread them out because I wanted to read them back to back, and I was like, no, I need to soak it in. And I just think they're incredible, and it showed me that someone could write a book for young adults that is adult, and bad things happen and good things happen, and it could be complex and interesting, and in a world that is unlike anything else. Because I feel like my book is set in a world that is unlike anything else. I find it really hard to describe to people. And it just showed me that there was a space for this kind of voice. And I just think they're incredible. And then finally, book number 12 is a book I read in 2020, and it's Captain Scott, the biography by Sir Ranulph Fiennes. And this showed that I just have a great interest. This ignited my interest in that era of polar exploration. It's just something that really interests me. The idea of going somewhere where there is nothing on the map. To push yourself. To potentially die in your attempt to discover something that is undiscoverable. And how the view of the British public was on these expeditions, how positive they were seen, they was like war heroes. How Scott and Shackleton and Amundsen and others just they came at things for different reasons. There was it was just a different time. And so how they approached things was so different to how they do it today. And I find that really interesting. So those are 12 books that have shaped my life. Sorry, this is a bit of a longer video. But I'm making my way through my cup of tea here. It hasn't gone cold yet, so that's good. And it's an interesting thing to think about, because they kind of read books at certain points in your life. And I think if you read it at the right time for you, then it could change your life. If you read it at a time that's not right for you, if you read it maybe a bit too early, then you won't even get into it. Or if you read it a bit too late, it won't have the impact that the author's looking for. So there's a strange correlation. Things need to come together. The randomness of the universe needs to collide in a particular way that you find that book at that time in your life. And that's something I find quite interesting. And I think if that happens, if those collisions of coincidences happen, then that can fundamentally change who you are and how you view the world. So let me know in the comments below, one, if you're still here, because this is a longer video, but also let me know what books changed your life and shaped your life. What books that you read at that time in your life, at a moment when that part of your psyche, of your personality, was clay and could be molded by the words written by someone else. I find that stuff really interesting. Anyway, enjoy your day, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye.